Something and
How's it going?
and missed missed the thing. I suck. I'm here to suck less. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I am setting up a mic better than my computer mic.
Okay. Yeah, take your time, no worries.
There we go. All right.
Awesome. Thank you for having the time to appear on Textbook Politics podcast.
All right.
I
Hang
just
on.
started
Wait, wait, wait,
this
wait, wait.
a few
Audios
weeks ago.
outputting. All right, that's better. All right, I got you now. All right, yeah. Hey, so let's talk.
All right, sweet. Yeah, thank you for having the time to talk. For those that don't know you, George, can you give us like a brief background of who you are?
Sure. So I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist since 1994. God help me. Um, I got my start in the Army. I was for a few years an Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter. I have long covered local politics, starting from DeKalb County and sort of radiating out through Georgia. I am now writing for The Guardian and Rolling Stone.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I'm in the process of starting a column with The Guardian looking at issues of democracy in the southeastern United States. And I am covering the YSL trial with Young Thug for Rolling Stone.
Mm, all right. I want to ask you about the YSL trials a little bit later because that is quite fascinating. That's what's going on in Atlanta. I wanted to ask you like what inspired you to become an investigative journalist or in the world of journalism in the first place? Like where does this start?
So, one, let's start with this. Like, I actually don't believe in investigative journalism.
Mm,
I think there's just good journalism and not good journalism.
mm,
Um, the like any journalist who is working is generally going to be doing the kind of digging that distinguishes them from just somebody who's blogging. Um, I started in the army by accident in a lot of ways. I was failing out of college. I was trying to be a microbiology student and largely not good at it, and um, decided to join the army. And I had intended to be a legal guy, a Radar O'Reilly law legal clerk, and then maybe, go be a lawyer later. In the recruiting station, as we're going through the list of jobs alphabetically, J for journalist comes before L for legal clerk. And I asked, all right, so what are the qualifications? And the sergeant major there is like, do you have 2 years of high school English? Well, yeah. Can you type 20 words a minute? Yeah. Are you colorblind? No. You qualify. And I made the decision on the spot, like, which is nuts. Like, and the things you do when you're 18. But the army was a good place to learn how to write because they can't fire you. Um, and bit by bit, like that, like I started there, and then I worked on technology. I wrote for Computer World during the .com crash, and then started writing more about politics and policy. Um, it's been a process, and mostly it's simply by about being exposed to what's happening in the world, and saying these are the things I can write about that make sense.
mm. And was there anybody in the when you first got started in journalism, was there anyone that you looked up to?
Lots of people, both the folks who were helping me, train essentially, but also writers. Um, every journalist goes through a Hunter S. Thompson phase, every single one. Um, and I think I got that out of my way early enough where it did not completely infect me. Um, although there's still a lot of experiential stuff in my reporting. But PJ O'Rourke, basically like the early Rolling Stone writers, they were important to me. Um, there are like, but I actually fashioned myself along the lines of old school newspaper columnists like Mike Royko, um, and Molly Ivins, um, people who are writing about what's happening. They're writing from a journalistic perspective, but they have opinions. Um, I am not one to separate uh, my perspective on what I'm writing about from everything else. I think it's important to bring facts to an argument, but as often as not, I am in fact trying to make an argument.
Mm. Okay. And what are when you, as a journalist, you talk to, I mean, countless amount of people throughout your career. How do you build? I don't know, one of my questions. How do you approach building and maintaining trust with sources or the people that you talk to get the story out?
That's a that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked it. Um, Part of it is being visible and being approachable and being uh, sort of a constant. Part of the problem with the journalism business is that everybody is looking for their up, however they can get it, because the bottom is terrible. It's so terrible it's not sustainable, and a lot of people wash out. Um, I'll give you an example of this. This is better. I went to a small newspaper in 2004 called the Rocky Mount Telegram in Rocky Mount, North Carolina,
Mm,
and um, I spent some time talking to the mayor before I actually took the job. And one of the things he said was, "You're not going to be here for very long." And he was right. I was there for about 1 year. Um, but I used that year, like both learning the business and building trust over time. Like I made a point of being persistent as I was pursuing one story or another so that they knew that I wasn't just going to disappear on it later.
mm,
And I have found over the 15 years, more than that, 18 years, I've been a journalist in Atlanta, knowing that I'm going to be around tomorrow and the next day and the next day changes the way some sources view me. That that I'm not just going to disappear to New York or Los Angeles or Chicago or DC in 6 months when somebody gives me a better offer.
mm,
Um, that I've shown over time a responsibility to the community that I'm covering.
mm,
And that changes a lot of the perspective of the folks who want to talk with me. They're
mm,
like, all right, this is a thing that I can trust you with.
mm. Okay. And was one of my other questions. So how are there any specific techniques that you use that you find particularly effective in your job of journalism?
I think the most so there were a couple of things. One, I have an MBA from Georgia Tech, along with a journalism degree. Um, I believe in data analysis. I believe in looking at numbers and then making those numbers make sense to a lay audience. And by connecting those numbers to an actual human being who's experiencing what we're talking about. Um, Believe it or not, I would say the most important undergraduate class I had was a class in computer assisted reporting, knowing how to use an Excel spreadsheet in order to tease out information that would otherwise be invisible. Um, and then having the journalistic sense to turn that into a news story somebody actually wants to read. Um, right now, I'm sitting on a database full of um, complaints, disciplinary reports for the Atlanta Police Department, like 10 years of that data. And like there are individual stories there that are interesting, but what I need to do is show people here's the trend. Here is what normal looks like. This is what you should expect.
Mm,
And so that when a deviation actually happens, the public will recognize it. So merging data with solid reporting and human and the human condition, this is important. The other thing is being super approachable as much as I can. I want my phone number in everybody's phone. I want people to know that they can find me if they've got something. And I spend a lot of time. I spend about 90% of my time, you know, going through story ideas and talking to people that are never going to end up getting written. Um, because my like one like my the resource of a journalist is actually dear. It's small. And so I have to pick and choose my targets, but also there is so much nonsense out there right now, things that are not true, that are sullying the historical record, that are, I fear for what a historian 15 years from now is going to do trying to figure out what was happening in the United States today, because the record is such garbage.
Mm.
And so, on some base level, I find myself acting as the guardian of that record. Yes, this was real. No, this was not real. Like, that's the essence of journalism today. I think that's what distinguishes a journalist from other people who write.
Mm. What are some advice that you'd give to anyone that's entering into the journalism field?
No, don't do it. No, run, run. No, that's, so the irony is we actually need more journalists. We need a lot more journalists. The problem is getting them paid.
Mm.
It isn't that, I mean, people want to do the work. They just don't want to earn $15 an hour doing it. Um, so my advice though, if you are serious, so one, understand that the business is cutthroat. Uh, 80% of people who start being a journalist will stop within 3 or 4 years because they don't see the up and out. Their trajectory isn't going to take them out of the jobs that aren't going to pay them enough to put a roof over their head. Um, so you need to be good, and you need to be realistic about that. You need to look around at the people who are around you, and if you're not the top 20% of the people who are trying to do this, then you might need to consider doing something else.
Mm.
Um, there are essential skills, I think, but anybody could be a journalist if they've got these essential skills. You do not need a journalism degree.
Mm.
Um, you need a high degree of skepticism of authority. You need to be willing to ask questions intelligently, like
Mm.
not just because you're doing it, but because you understand that there are orthodoxies that need to be challenged.
Mm.
Um, like this, it's it takes a while. It is not a natural impulse to go, well, cops lie, or this politician will lie, um, or this business person will lie. Um, the like that you have to need you have to have a need to prove things correct or incorrect. You have to be able to write, and you have to be able to write quickly. um like, there's no joke. Like, sometimes you're looking at a story where you need to have it out in 20 minutes, and it needs to be coherent, and it needs to be factual. And that's what journalism programs do. They teach you how to write true things quickly in a way that people will actually want to read them. I
Mm.
don't think that's also not a natural skill. You have to learn it.
Mm.
Like, that discernment about what is important and is not is hard. Uh, the the third thing is that you really need a very high degree of personal integrity. Like, you can't be a dirtbag and be a journalist and not get caught. It just doesn't happen. Um, because when you are writing things that journalism is about writing things that people don't want you to read. Everything else is public relations. Um, and so when you're writing things that that might harm someone because they're being read, those people will come after you eventually. Like, and they will probe your integrity.
Mm.
And so, unless your personal integrity, unless um, you're not lying to people, you're not cheating, you're not making stuff up, uh, like, you have to live to some degree like a monk.
Mm.
Um, and that's no joke. Like, I don't speed. Um, I wait for the lights when I know I never want to give somebody an excuse to say, well, we can't trust you because you're obviously crooked. Um, I spend a lot of time writing about people who are not obviously crooked, but are crooked.
Mhm.
And so, like, if you want to make change, you have to be believed, and to be believed, you have to be believable.
Mm. And oh, go ahead.
No, I think that's it. Those are the big ones.
Okay. And that kind of leads to the good segue to the next question. How do you balance? You brought up about integrity and kind of coming into it with some skepticism of different groups of people. How do you balance the need for transparency with the potential risks associated with exposing corruption?
So, the transparency question is interesting because we're in an odd time. Um, Everybody's stuff tends to be out there on social media. Um, like part of the reason why I am the person I am in public is because I like it's an integrity issue. Um, we are awash in anonymous writing. People who are on Twitter with fake handles or anonymous handles or trying to post stuff on, you know, social media boards, and it's nonsense, but there's no way to trace it back to them. I I maintain a very like high level public persona, I guess, because I am I am I'm applying that standard to other people in positions of authority. I think the more power and authority you have in society, the more transparent more transparency we should demand of you. And I mean that not just of people who are elected to public office or people who hold public office, but I mean everybody. Um, Wealthy people, famous people.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so balancing that against the sort of the general privacy, because our privacy is also like, even if you're not famous or rich or powerful, our privacy in general is under attack. Um, and it's being abused by people who are themselves not particularly transparent. Uh, and so the rule I have here is to kick up and kiss down. Um, in general, in a dispute, I am taking the side of the weaker party, unless there's a really good reason to do otherwise.
mm,
Um, and the amount of transparency I demand of people is directly correlated with their power.
mhm,
Um, People who are likely to lose their jobs or their relationships or their lives because they're saying truthful things to me are going to be protected. But people who are in a position to take others' jobs, careers, relationships, and lives are not.
mm,
That's the rule.
mm. And in your experience, you've been a journalist for a really, really long time. How has the landscape of journalism evolved, and how has it affected your approach to your work?
Yeah. So a lot of ways. I mean, I I started doing journalism in a time that was pre-internet, um, where to put up a newspaper, you had a wax board and you were cutting out pieces and putting it literally laying it out on a table to send it to the printer. Um, the 24-hour news cycle has fundamentally changed journalism. Like it is the largest and most important change. It's more important than the internet, to be perfectly honest. Um, because we get things wrong because we've got to move so quickly. Uh, and that first impulse, the first thing people see is often the only thing they see. Um, so that plus this sort of deliberate seeding of misinformation into the public, those are the things that I fear for. Uh, there are people who have decided that it is better or more profitable to spread manure around a topic, a person, so that nobody can believe anything. People stop believing anything they're reading about something because There's so much nonsense out there. And that damages everything and everyone. And it's deliberate. It's absolutely deliberate.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes it's even state sponsored. Um, yeah, that's the hardest. That's the biggest problem. That's the biggest change. I mean, don't get me wrong, like everything isn't terrible and things some things have gotten better. It is much easier for me to gather information of some sorts, particularly statistical information. Being able to immediately to instantly dive into a historical database so that I have context for what's going on is an amazing change to journalism. And it is to our shame that more journalists don't try to inject more context, more of this historical context into their daily reporting.
Mm.
Um, it's one thing to say somebody got shot outside of a house in North Decatur. It is another thing to tell people how often that happens and why.
Mm.
And the why part of that is what's often missing from journalism, and it is the thing that I think distinguishes me from my peers in that I focus on the why.
Mm. Okay. And you, when bringing up like the uh kind of the attack on press that could be state sponsored. Of course, the United States, so we have in our First Amendment the freedom of the press, and then even throughout our or freedoms in the First Amendment, like speech, religion, it's all. I mean, there's we have, I mean, quote, yeah, we have those freedoms, but they're also limited in certain regards. And how you look at like other parts of the world where journalism or journalists mysteriously when they critique their governments they mysteriously disappear or get
Yeah.
killed. How, like, I guess the question I'm asking is like, how do you see, like, what can like the people or what do you think needs to change in order for journalism in certain countries to be safer?
Part of it is everybody needs to be safer in the countries where journalism is at risk. Um, like this has been one of the worst years in recent history for press deaths.
Mm.
And it's not just the Israeli Gaza war where journalists are getting killed left and right every single day. We had a vigil here in Atlanta for the deaths of journalists in Gaza. Um, but Mexico, Russia, certainly. Half of my family is Nigerian, and Nigerian journalists go missing a lot. Nobody talks about it
Mm.
because it's Nigeria, and honestly, we're really not focused on that. Um, those attacks on journalists reflect the underlying uh, danger in those societies in general. They are societies that have deep political instability. Um, the like South Sudan, Eritrea. Um, there are places we're talking about places where war is happening or is armed conflict is common, and those are the things that have to be addressed first. This is kind of a Maslow's hierarchy of journalistic needs problem here. Um, Food, shelter, clothing, like basic safety, not just for journalists but for everybody. Um, you're not like on some very basic level, journalists are not, they're regular people. They're not folks who are running around generally with 20 armed guards and the power of the state behind them. Um, if journalists are getting killed, ask yourself how many other people are getting killed too. And in general, you're going to find the numbers are astronomical.
Mm. Mm. So how my next question is hold on, I had it right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So how do you see like when it comes to local news? I was born and grew up in or I grew up in Conyers in Rockdale County.
Yep.
And The two, there was like the Rockdale Citizen, and I think there's another, I think it kind of combined with Newton County. But anyway, when I'm or growing up, it seems like a lot of the like the local news stories were just focusing on local issues like the mayor's race or the new restaurant that just opened up.
Yep.
But now, when I look on social media for the Rockdale Citizen or any other local store or a newspaper, it seems like they talk about is things that don't happen. That's like it's not pertaining to what's happening locally, like how what
Terrible mistake they're making, honestly.
yeah.
Um, so there are a couple of things going on here. Georgia is interesting in some ways, in that there are pseudo state sponsored publications in every county.
Mm-hmm.
So, fun fact, um, the legal notices that have to be published in order to do something in court are published in what's called the county organ. Um, the county organ here in DeKalb is the DeKalb Champion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure it was the Rockdale Citizen in Newton County, um, and others. Uh, Almost nobody reads these papers. They exist because they've got the contract from the county to publish those legal notices at $50 or $100 a pop. Um, but they're also a political thing, like the a a three-person committee: the sheriff, the chief clerk of courts, and the chief of the local of the chief of the superior court in that county choose the organ, and all three of those folks are elected officials, and so those publications tend to be very, they don't publish a lot of news that's controversial. um and as time goes on, they're not publishing much news as I would describe it at all, because they don't have to,
Mm-hmm.
because they're not there to serve their community necessarily as an organ of news, even though often in small counties they're the only local newspaper in town, which is nuts. Honestly, I think the whole system should be blown up, um, because the irony is that they get in the way of other smaller publishers who might be doing a better job, but can't find their financial footing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's going on. I think that's what you're seeing there.
Mm.
Um, and it's interesting. Like, so I write from time to time for Decaturish,
Yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah.
and my wife writes far more frequently than I do for Decaturish. As a matter of fact, she wrote extensively about like the controversies around the physical plant and infrastructure at Druid Hills High School. Um, and she's sort of looking at me over in the corner. Hi, if you want to say hi, Sarah. The um, there, yeah, the Decaturish is filling a niche because the Champions news reporting just wasn't getting it done. Um, and they're continuing to publish, like, and I think they're going on something like 8 or 9 years at this point. Um, they break news, they challenge orthodoxy, they challenge authority, and that's how that works.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we need more displacement like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony is, I think the internet actually makes that easier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Problem is, you know, there's just so much advertising and subscription money to go around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dan's doing a great job over at the Decaturish. I did send or reach out to him about making an appearance on the podcast at some point. So maybe after he listens to this, he'll be more persuaded.
There you go.
The next question is, are there any issues? Well, of course, uh, recently in Atlanta, there's been stories on, or you have Cop City, you have the YSL Young Thug trials, you have what's going on with the fake elector scheme with President Trump. All those have been, at least locally and even in certain cases nationally highlighted. Are there any issues or social justice issues in Atlanta that you believe deserve more attention?
There is no shortage of stories around, particularly around social justice and justice period
Mm,
things that are going on. Uh, the condition of the jail is a nightmare. It should be at the top of everybody's mind. We are willing to march through the streets when a police officer shoots and kills somebody who is unarmed and should not be dead. But there were 10 prisoners who were killed in who died, who died in the Fulton County jail system this year. Uh, there are only about 2,000 people in that jail at any given time. So if you're telling me that the odds are 1 in 200 that you're going to die, those are like 20 times higher than the most high crime street corner in metro Atlanta. Um, 200 to 1 is insane. Um, and pre-pandemic, it was like 1 or 2 a year, and there were always medical stuff. Somebody had a heart attack. Um, that's not getting nearly enough attention. The backup in the courts not getting enough attention. Uh, I don't think this recent killing with regard to uh, Deacon Johnny Holloway
mm,
uh, got the attention I think it deserved, despite the video, which was grotesque and horrifying. Um, we have a general housing crisis, and it's enough to say, well, it's a crisis. It's a crisis that's been going on for years, so it doesn't feel like a crisis. But you go into some of the apartment complexes around Metro Atlanta, and you will look, and it will look like Mogadishu or a favela in terms of its safety. You have children living in unimaginable squalor and terror um, in ways that I don't know about you. If you grew up in Conyers, this should be foreign territory to you. You should never have seen anything like this.
yeah,
Uh,
go ahead.
and I grew up in central Massachusetts.
Mm,
I grew up south of Worcester, like in the middle of New England. No experience with this kind of poverty. Um, I think we don't look at that nearly enough. And I think that there are moments that are coming that should and will shock the conscience. And people will look around and go, how did it get this bad? And that, like, I will hear that. And then off in the distance, you will hear me screaming, like, well, this is how it got this bad. And I'm waving semaphore flags and whatnot. Um, it's like, it's bad. Um, more broadly, like we're going to be inundated with political stuff over the course of the next year. Like it's 2024, we're in a swing state. Like the Trump controversies are what they are. He's going to face trial here, and that's going to eat half of the journalistic attention that can be applied to anything in Georgia. Like that's Georgia news. Like that's every news station in America, every cable network, every large website is going to descend upon us like locusts every 4 years.
mhm,
It's coming.
mhm,
There's a lot of stuff going on, and we're not going to see it all because there just aren't enough people looking.
mm. And what speaking of of or the next election, you a couple or a few years ago you broke the story about the uh fake elector scheme. Like, can you like tell us like your experience sharing and writing that story?
Sure. So we will recap.
Yeah.
Um, so the election happens in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody on the right anyway collectively loses their mind. Um, and I am sort of watching this and writing things here and there for the Intercept. I happened to be over at the state capitol a few days before the electors voted in December. Um, you may remember, like, this was in the middle of the Kraken lawsuit stuff and uh, Rudy Giuliani showing up with Trump's lawyers to essentially lie to the state legislature. Um, so I'm on the steps of the Capitol and I'm watching Nick Fuentes, who is a white
Hmm.
nationalist maniac, and Alexander, who was the head of the Stop the Steal stuff, and some other folks of similar ilk, calling for uh, a truck blockade of Atlanta. They wanted truckers to ring the city. That was something that had started to happen in Canada, and they
Hmm.
wanted to bring that here. And meanwhile, Alex Jones is doing crop circles around the Capitol in an armored personnel carrier,
Hmm.
like with a bullhorn out of the cupola. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Um, and then I noticed that there were Proud Boys and 3%er militia guys and some other like provocateurs in the crowd. And there was a crowd of like 100 or 200 people in front listening to this noise. And all the cars that were parked on the street had license plates from out of state: Ohio, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Like, so you're going to try something. Like, you're making noises about trying something. Um, so I went to the Capitol. I went to the state Capitol on December, I think it was 12th, 14th of 2020 to watch the electoral vote. Not because I thought the electoral vote was going to be some massive, interesting. It's a, it's bookkeeping. It's not supposed to be.
Procedural, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I was there because I thought the Ku Klux Klan and a bunch of militia guys were going to storm the Capitol here. And instead, what I found was an old friend of mine who was a young man. I'd known him since he was a teenager, who was a right wing, he was an African American right wing uh, social media star. Um, and I looked at him like, hey, what's going on? And he doesn't make eye contact with me. I mean, we know each other. And he's like, I'm not talking to you. Like, and he just goes off into a room. And I'm like, there, you're doing something. Because I knew that guy was one of the Republican electors who would have been an elector. So I followed him in with a camera going, my cell phone camera, like the door. Hey, I'm George Chidi. What's going on? And like, oh, we're having a meeting. And somebody says, oh, he's got a camera going and you've got to get out of here. And so this guy's hustling me out. Why are you having a meeting? What kind of meeting is it? And then a woman who I believe was later identified as chairman of the Coffee County Republican
Mm.
Party says, oh, we're having an education meeting. And then they close the door and then they plant somebody in front of the door in the Capitol to keep other people like me out. And I'm looking around like, they're doing elector stuff. And I took a screenshot of like a still from the video and I put it up on Twitter. Who are these people? And my friends start identifying them. But I didn't actually end up writing a story. I just tweeted it.
Mhm.
Because the Intercept folks were just dealing with really weird stuff from Georgia, and this just didn't seem to, at the moment, rise above all of the rest of this. It's procedural. Who cares what the hell they're doing? Like, this is dumb. Turns out it was important um, that they had been specifically instructed not to let anybody from the media know what they were doing.
Mm.
Um, this is the value, by the way, of boots on the ground reporting and not sitting behind a screen sort of reporting from a distance. You have to physically be where things are happening. I found that that's true in court. I found that's true when you're looking at crime and a lot of other things. There's no substitute for having two eyes and the ability to ask questions immediately.
Mm.
So yeah, a year or so later, like 2 years later, Fonnie Willis discovers that I had been there. And I think it's because a journalist friend of mine told her. And I get subpoenaed to go testify in front of the grand jury, and then subpoenaed again for the regular jury, of the other grand jury, I should say. And I'm expecting, and I got a subpoena again for this current, before the Chesborough and Sidney
Mhm.
Powell took plea deals, I would have had to testify in front of them. And I'm expecting to be subpoenaed again. And I think I'm going to end up having to fight this last one.
Mm.
which sucks. I don't really want to, but I feel like it has reached a point where it becomes necessary to protect the act of journalism from like there that it cannot it can't be an easy thing to let a district attorney issue subpoenas to testify to journalists because it can be used as an act of intimidation or
Mhm.
worse, a means of dragging source material out. Because I am writing about criminal cases in Fulton County where there are people who should not be talking to me who are talking to me.
Mm.
And I'm not going to tell anybody who they are. Um, that's that whole long term, I'm going to be around forever. You can trust me because I'm not here to screw you. I'm here to tell the story thing. If I like, those people gave me their confidence and I'm not going to betray it. Uh, I don't think I'm going to have to, but you got to put up a fight, I think. So
Mm.
here we are.
Mm.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No, no, that was awesome. Do you ever, when you're breaking the story or that particular story or any story so far in your career, did you ever fear for your safety?
Yeah, a couple of times, but not on this one. Like I wondered about it a little bit, and I've been waiting for people to threaten me, and it really hasn't happened. And maybe it's because I don't look threatenable at this point. I don't know. But I got my butt kicked in the street reporting during the protests in 2020. Like quite literally, I was beaten and I had guns in my face. It was, I was, do you remember when gunmen took over the street corner at the protest site of the Sequoia, not Sequoia Turtle,
Oh, oh, at the
uh,
Wendy's.
at the Wendy's,
Yes, yes,
at
yes,
the Wendy's with
yes,
Richard Brooks.
yes. Yeah, I remember.
So I got a friend like this is again, it's like the essence of my journalism is being highly connected to the community so that they tell me things that other people don't hear. One of those folks tells me, hey, look, they're stopping all the white people from driving through. And I knew some context to that because there had been some incidents earlier where what looked like Proud Boys were taking pot shots at protesters and people were firing back into cars. It was a really crazy moment. But I didn't believe that they were actually doing that. I'm like, I don't believe you. I'm going to go look.
Mm,
So I went down there alone at 10 o'clock at night,
mm,
counting on this idea that, well, everybody knows who I am. I'm on TV sometimes.
mm,
I'm black. They're not going to hurt me.
mhm,
So I went down there to go find out what's going on. And they're like, we don't want you here. Go away. Oh, wait, were you taking pictures of us? I was not, in fact, taking pictures of us. You got to give us your cell phone. I'm like, I'm not giving you my cell phone. We're standing in the parking lot. Four guys and a woman sort of form a semicircle around me. And one of them's got his hand on his gun and says, look, I'm going to count to 10. And if you don't give us your phone, we're going to shoot you. And he starts counting backwards. And at 5, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to leave. And so I start walking away and he runs out in front of me, pops me in the face. And I used a box. I'm embarrassed.
mm,
Like, he hits me in the face and I'm like, and it takes me a second. It's like there's a chyron running underneath the screen.
mm,
George, you are under attack.
mm,
I'm not doing it. George, put your hands up. Um, so a couple of guys start wailing on me, and but they're all small. I'm a big guy.
mhm,
Um, put my hands up, get into the light, back up, walk away, and there's a crowd of like 50 people, all armed, just sort of hooting and hollering at this point. Um, I'm very lucky more than that didn't happen. Um, but I got into the car, drove to Grady, called my wife, and I'm a little embarrassed by it all now because I should have taken more precautions. Um, it turns out, at least the police say, that the people there were members of a street gang and that they were, that Richard Brooks was also a member of that street gang and that they were, you know, controlling territory in that act, that
mm.
that was a gang act. Um, I told that guy, "You're not going to shoot me. I'm a journalist, and you're surrounded by witnesses. It's just not going to happen." And it was true, but it was also arrogant.
Hmm.
And I have been wrestling with that kind of lack of humility. Like it was literally a humbling thing. Um, I no longer make presumptions about what people know about me or how they're going to behave.
Hmm. And one of the other stories mentioned earlier has it feels like it had like a lot of moment or like a lot of press coverage, and now it's kind of somewhat died down a little bit, but still happening as the Stop Cop City movement.
Mhm.
What is your take on how what do you see in the future of this movement or this issue happening?
I think it may cost. I think it may cost Joe Biden re-election, and let me walk through that. Um, so, just recap: like Atlanta is looking to build a training facility for police officers. The training facility is $90 million.
Mhm.
30 million of that is going to be paid for by corporate donors. Um, the the facility will be administered by a private charitable nonprofit called the Atlanta Police Foundation. Uh, it's being built on environmentally sensitive land. There have been meaningful questions about how much public money is being used because initially it was supposed to be 30 million, and then at the last minute they said it was $60 million. Uh, I like the politics of this are terrible because it came through at a moment when people were in the street protesting over police brutality and looking for reform, and instead the Atlanta City Council spends $90 million on a police training facility. There seems to be a disconnect there. Um, I'm, I've seen the current police training facility. I actually think Atlanta needs a new one. Like the only question is where and when and how do you do it? How do you spend for it and what, like the details. Um, Problem is the city has been just bulldozing over its opposition, which has emboldened its opposition. And when uh, uh, a protester, an activist, was shot and killed by state police in January of this year, uh, things became much more radical than they were. Um, Construction equipment is being burned. All right, so that's the background. Like moving forward, uh, the folks who are protesting against it want a referendum. They are very close to, or got very close to getting the necessary signatures in order to get a referendum on the ballot. The city, this city, which is supposed to be dedicated to the idea of democracy, like in the name of Martin Luther King Jr., and all of the crazy political stuff of the last 5 and 10 years, is doing everything they can to deny opponents that referendum, up to and including, I suspect, a change in referendum law that will happen at the legislature this year. Um, Half of the folks who are in the street are activists who are expected by the Democratic Party to go knock on doors and raise money and mobilize communities in order to vote for Joe Biden in 2024. And a lot of those folks are looking at the Biden administration, wondering, where are you? Why are you not? Why are you not backing us? Why are you letting this go forward? Why are you letting all of this anti-democratic stuff go forward when we keep saying that Republicans are the ones who are the great threat to democracy? And I think a lot of those folks are going to sit on their hands in 2024. They will be unmotivated to help because they won't see a fundamental difference. Now, I still think there's a fundamental difference, but they won't. And if the margin is anything like the 11,000 votes from 2020, that's the margin between Georgia voting for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And it is entirely possible that that's the margin of victory for either Donald Trump or Joe Biden in the general election.
Mm.
Like Cop City is a fulcrum around which I think the national politics move. And I keep telling people this, and they're not really listening to me yet. And then I'm going to tell them again in November, if this remains to be true, that I've been telling you this for a year. And where the hell were you? Why were you not listening?
Mm.
Um, it is one thing to be an observer of facts, and it is another thing to be believed and heard. It's why I spend as much time as I do maintaining my credibility.
Mm. And with the construction of or the, I guess the attempted construction of the police facility, because I know parts of the city of Atlanta does encompass part of DeKalb County, a very tiny, tiny part. Is that
Right.
where? No, and it's
No,
not, right. It's not in within the city.
it's not within the technical city limits. It's not, and that's deliberate.
Mm.
So look, if you're trying to do basically anything in the city of Atlanta, like you have to go through an approval process that goes through the local neighborhood planning unit.
Hmm.
Um, and those planning units can be kind of hard to work with. And everybody knows it. And so we've got a NIMBY problem that makes public development in general kind of hard. They knew that there would be some opposition to this. And so rather than deal with all of that, they used the plot of land that the one plot of land that for which that process does not apply. They didn't need anybody's approval. It's a quirk in state law. A municipality that owns land in another territory can develop it according to its internal like planning process without having to refer to DeKalb County's planning and zoning folks. They didn't need permission.
Mm.
Like that's why they did it there.
Mm.
Because I'm going to tell you, like there are other places in the city of Atlanta where this training facility would have made sense. Honestly, they could have given up some of Chastain in Buckhead in a community which wants the training facility, except that they didn't want that NIMBY problem because people in Buckhead have money and they know how to fight. And they didn't want that. So instead, they put it in the middle of a black neighborhood in South DeKalb.
Mm. Yeah. And that's gonna, yeah, it's gonna like the it's just I don't know, like it was when I first heard about it, that how did, yeah, the location of it is like, didn't, how does, did DeKalb County not have a voice at all? That's kind of, that's
Nope.
it. That's
State law.
crazy. It's
It's
crazy.
nuts.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why, like, my radar's been up on this whole thing.
Mm.
Like, look, there are people who care about this because of the environmental issue, and I understand that. I don't necessarily agree with them. I think the environmental stuff could be mitigated. There are people who are looking at this in terms of sort of police reform and training issues. Like, how dare you spend all of this money? Imagine what we could do with $90 million to reduce violence if we weren't spending it here and we're spending it someplace else there. And I get that too. Like, but we still need a training facility. I understand that. And you could get some of these training issues into the training facility. I think this would have been a good place to have that conversation. But for me, the problem I've got is that there's a fundamental lack of transparency. Atlanta's got a terrible history around corruption, like the airport, the sewer stuff. People are going to jail left and right. People went to jail this year for stuff that happened 4 and 5 years ago.
Mhm.
Like there's like Atlanta as an institution cannot be trusted.
Mhm.
Like it's not a partisan thing. That's a journalist looking at who's going to jail thing.
Mhm.
Um, and so you've given control of a police training facility to a nonprofit organization with corporate board members and no like where they are not statutorily required to answer an open records act request or have an open meeting where I can't tell what the hell they're doing because
Mm.
they won't tell me.
Mm,
They don't have to tell anybody.
mm,
Why run it through them unless you're trying to hide something? And so I'm left going, well, you're plainly hiding some stuff. What is it? Like, and until I really know, I'm just no, don't, you can't do this. Don't do this. I'm against it.
mm. And with and you mentioned earlier about that this the Cop City movement could potentially cost Biden key votes in this state. And most of, the city, I think practically everyone that's on the Atlanta City Council, including the mayor, like they're all and Joe Biden, they're all, member of the same political party, I would assume.
Yeah.
You know.
There are maybe three Republicans on the city council.
Okay. But it's largely in part Democrats are in the majority in the city council and
Yep.
much of Fulton County, DeKalb, like Atlanta in
Yep.
general. So do you think like they do you think that some of the city council members that are Democrats and including and then Mayor Dickens, like do you think that they realize that this could potentially cause or cost Biden potentially the state if the margins are so close?
I think that it's in the back of their minds. I think they've got more practical issues in front of them right now. Um, and I think that's part of the problem. So I am reasonably certain that uh, the what passes for a police union, because police don't really have unions power per se in Georgia, but the the police union and the Atlanta Police Foundation have both, threatened politically the careers of any politician who's getting in the way of what they think they need.
Mm,
Um, that on the one hand, they're like, yeah, this is going to cause a problem for, the state and this specific problem, but we think we will eventually prevail, and we certainly hope we will. This I'm speaking like, picture me as a city council person who's voted for this thing. I'm like, I hope this works out, but if I didn't go in this direction, I know I was going to get smacked around by these other political forces. And I will take that maybe over this certainty.
mm,
Um, it's really short termist political thinking, and it's, you know, a product of the way politics works. Um, I think there will be city council people who will lose their jobs over this. Um, and it's not going to be the ones that the police foundation thinks. Like, they think that they're going to be able to raise a bunch of money and find a challenger who will be more amenable to their views and displace the four, maybe five city council people who oppose Cop City. And they're wrong. Like, I think the more likely thing is that some of the Cop City supporters are going to lose their seats, because I think the opposition right now is that strong.
mm,
The idea that they could get even 50,000. So uh, they turned in a petition with 110, 115,000 signatures on it. About half of those signatures are garbage
mm,
because every people signing and they live somewhere else or they weren't registered to vote or whatever. Like, that's normal, by the way. People do that with petitions. But if even 60 or 60,000 of those signatures are valid, that's more votes than anybody has gotten for anything in the city of Atlanta in living memory. The mayor did not get elected with 60,000 votes. No city council person got elected with 60,000 votes. I don't think Nikema Williams, the congresswoman who represents part of Atlanta, got 60,000 votes in Atlanta.
mm,
Like, those folks are going to look at what's happening here and they're going to go, find me another Democrat. This one's broken.
mm, mm. And what the next thing before I want to talk about the Young Thug trial is your or you mentioned earlier about how like the bottom of journalism is like complete nonsense and it's kind of been intertwined with like a lot of bad actors and bad faith people, putting out nonsense stories. And social media hasn't really helped with that. How is the age, actually, uh, let's see, my question is, how do you get people to be more digitally media literate, to understand what's, you know, real?
This
Yeah.
is your job.
Yes.
I mean, I've been saying this for a while that I actually think media literacy has to be inculcated into the high school
Yeah.
curriculum. Like that has to be core. Like if we're going to protect our democracy, then like a 10th grader needs to have the tools to learn to say, all right, this is a credible website, this one isn't. This is what credible reporting looks like, this is not. This is a credible historical source, this is not. Like don't 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 use Wikipedia to go and write your term paper. What are you doing? Stuff. Like, and I know you do this. I know you do this. It's part of the reason I'm so happy to talk with you because I'm actually intimately curious about how you are teaching around this problem.
Hmm.
Like, in fact, let me ask you, what are
Okay.
you doing?
So, well, those that don't know, I teach at Druid Hills High School in DeKalb County, and I'm in the social studies department. So this past semester, for the first time, I've taught civics, and that's paired with a current issues course. And we were able to go through, yeah, lots of different covered lots of different topics. And one week, I did spend time on how to look at stories that are like I had them like do an assign. I had my kids, and they're ninth graders for the most part, do an assignment where they look up like any type of story, and we just kind of go through, like, okay, we go through all types of sources: CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, Washington Post, even local AJC. And we kind of like dissect of, okay, every single, like, the point is, like, okay, every single source that you're going to look at, that's, especially if it's opinionated, it's always going to come at with bias from somewhere. And I try to make sure that, hey, you got to make sure that you look at different sources that are credible, and I tell them that, here are some things to look for when you think about credible or not credible sources. Like, if it's some sort of uh website where it is going to be uh plastered with, like, or it's like, if it's, let's say, emotionally charged words that are in the URL, or if it's something that is like Uncle Bob's patriotnews.com, something that's super elaborate, that I tell them that you have to take certain things with a grain of salt, and to kind of lead them to sources that are more credible, that will just state facts, and then have them look at sources that could tell different angles and perspectives.
Let me tell you. Excuse
Yeah.
me. Let me tell you something really basic.
Hmm.
Is there a byline on the story? Is there a human being
Hmm.
who has a record that you can find this person? Like, and can you find the publisher? Is there a mailing address, a physical address?
Hmm.
Like, who is the person who is telling you this? And have they been around long enough? Have they been, are they attached to something credible enough to believe? I'm just this morning, like I was on Reddit.
Hmm.
God help me. I'm on Reddit. I'm quitting Twitter and it's like chewing nicotine gum. I'm on Reddit and I'm seeing some story about how Bill Clinton had some crazy quote about the 2016 election where Hillary couldn't sell sex to and I'm paraphrasing here, sex to a train full of troops.
Mm,
Um the but I'm looking at the website that this was posted on, and it's some Saudi foreign exchange currency trading website that just happens to have news stories on it. And there's no byline on the story, and I can't figure out who's actually publishing it. I'm like, okay, but this is on a Reddit page that's had probably 5,000 views on it, maybe 10. Like, for nothing, for zero effort, they have influenced 5 or 10,000 people. Like, that's powerful. It's also evil.
hmm
Like, but it's all, and it's super common. Like, and so, like, unless you're primed to go, like, oh, well, okay, is this nonsense or not? Like, can I find this person? You're never gonna, like, you'll just eat it.
hmm
You'll engage with it like it's real.
hmm
And maybe it is real, but I can't tell. Not from that.
hmm
Like, I just, everybody, if you shouldn't be able to graduate from high school without being able to ask that basic question: who is telling me this information? And should I trust them?
hmm Yeah, it's I think I mean it's not well for of course, I mean this topic of, let's say, Reddit or different meme culture is kind of ingrained with the young people. It's not just young people, but I try to emphasize like my kids will like or students will talk about like I don't know, some random meme that covers news or whatever, and I tell them that we gotta be very careful because memes aren't news. That anybody could put a font out or I try to tell them or I gave them an example of if they ever went to the grocery store. At least I remember when I think they still have like magazines or that are like yellow journalism magazines. I'll try to get like they use like yellow fonts and bright colors and get the most
Like that sort of thing. Like
yeah.
you're, yeah.
And so I asked them like, do they ever notice like on these magazine covers that are just celebrity gossip, they'll try to use like words that are like, I don't know, just more emotionally charged or find pictures that are of whoever that is considered unflattering to try to just, and I tell them like, that's kind of like, I gotta be careful of, there's someone's, a lot of, people that are, working, for different, I guess companies or journalistic companies. They're trying to, sell advertisements or try to get people to buy, the story that looks that's just, I don't know, for ratings. I don't know.
The irony is that there are scream sheet tabloidy
hmm
publications that are also doing good journalism.
hmm
Like, I can't believe the words coming out of my mouth. TMZ
Right. Yeah.
has some of the best journalists
hmm
for what they do and how they can get at it. Like, they have broken news, like with really like factual sort of. They've got this network of informants. I don't know how the hell they operate,
mm
but they're fast and they're often accurate, and it's shocking. I still don't get it. Um, they will beat CNN
hmm
half the time. Um, with about the same accuracy rating. So I'm like looking at this, like, how did TMZ, of all the entities, build this journalistic thing? Teen Vogue, Teen Vogue has a political arm that's effective as journalists. Like, and by the way, the former editor for Teen Vogue was an AJC reporter, um, Jewel Wicker, who's local, like, and sort of drove some of that. And it's it's fascinating to watch, like, some entities, some journalistic entities figure out how to get this done right and they rise above the rest, and others just sort of sink.
mm
Competition, I mean, that's what it is.
mm And the last topic I wanted to talk about is the Young Thug YSL trial. And I mean, I don't really. I mean, I know who Young Thug is. I've heard a few of his songs before. I'm not an avid listener of his. But I've kind of read through a little bit about what's going on with him and some of people that he's associated with being charged or kind of what's it called, the RICO charges.
Yep.
Can you and you've extensively covered what's going on with this case, and it's interesting because it's also dealing with Fulton County and Fonnie Willis is dealing. It's like it's weird how she's dealing with just two different just wild like just I don't know with
They're
Young Thug.
different, but they're
Just
not. Like
I know,
she's
yeah,
in
yes,
RICO in
it is
both
RICO,
cases.
yes.
Yeah, the Young Thug case has been super interesting. It's really it came at me from really left field. I was writing about criminal justice stuff. Fonnie Willis made a statement in 2021, essentially saying gangs are responsible for 80% of the violent crime in Atlanta. And I looked at that like, I don't believe like this challenge authority. Like it's easy to say it's all gang stuff. And I'm like, all right, well, that's just politics. You're making noise. It's a, sensational thing. How real is this? So I started digging and I kept finding references to YSL in other documents. And it became really obvious that there was a long running investigation and that Young Thug was likely to be arrested. So I wrote that a few months before he got arrested. And people were like, what are you talking about? And then other people were like, well, we've been kind of expecting that. And then it happened. So suddenly I'm like some prognosticating, like music journalist. I'm like, really? No. Um, if it's post Outcast, I need help. I don't, I'm, I love hip hop,
Mm,
but I'm 50 years old. And so what a 20-year-old is listening to, what your students are listening to is
yeah.
largely a mystery to me. So, yeah, uh, the trial's been a nightmare. The trial has been one of the biggest calamities up and down in terms of its effect on the legal system and the treatment of the folks who are inside it that I can say. I know I'm speaking in hyperbole, but it's it took 8 months to seat a jury. It is the longest period of jury seating that has happened in the state's history. In this case,
Mm,
um, you know, you've had lawyers who've had to be dismissed, like you've both prosecution and defense, I might add. Um, Weird misconduct in court, like the thing where one of the guys was trying to pass a Percocet to the other.
I did.
Like a a guy gets busted for smoking weed in the court, like in the bathroom in the court during a break, like carted off screaming and strip searched. A lawyer gets arrested the next day because they didn't like the pill bottle he had his personal medicine in, and on and on. Um, we're approaching 2 years since Young Thug was arrested, and he's still in jail. Um, Bond was never like exactly one person in this case was granted bond, and that's despite the fact that they cut plea deals for half of the folks, like and sent them off, and there has not been chaos in the streets. Um, I know I'm sound like I'm coming down on Young Thug's side here, and I'm not. Like, to be frank, I expect him to be convicted because most people are convicted on these charges. I think in general, the evidence that the prosecution is presenting is fairly strong, except the prosecution is also playing games with what evidence they've been willing to show the defense. I think there's going to be an appeal. I think the appeal is likely to be successful. I and so we're going to be tied up with this thing for years and years and years. We've essentially tied down one judge in court for 2 years. That guy doesn't get to hear anything else,
mm,
just this. Like it's the chief judge of the Fulton County Superior Court has one case in front of him, and it's this one, and it's gonna be this one for 2 years of his life.
mm,
Like there are only like 18 or so judges in that courthouse, so you've got one case, one like with 2,000 people sitting in jail.
mhm.
You have one Superior Court judge tied to this one case, basically permanently.
and it's interesting because it's been a couple years, right? And Young Thug's in jail currently, correct? And so
Correct.
where does my I've always wondered, like, where does the Sixth Amendment come into play of like the right to a speedy and
Mhm.
public trial? Like, how does that? I don't even, you
So
know?
you're right. You're asking the correct question.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, the court declared a judicial emergency and set aside speedy trial
Mm,
rules.
mm,
That didn't lift until June of this year.
okay.
So for the first year he was in court, they couldn't file a speedy trial demand. You're not, you are entitled to a speedy trial if you ask for one. Often defendants choose not to do that because they are attempting to delay a conviction or to elicit, they want as much time as possible in order to review the evidence, in order to build a defense. But sometimes they'll find it in their interest to go like, no, you arrested me, we're going now. Um, the but you weren't allowed to until June of this year. Um, Never mind the Young Thug trial. There's another rap trial that's connected to it, the YFN RICO case
Mm,
with YFN Lucci, who is looking at a murder charge over a botched drive-by. He's been in jail since January, February of 2021, and his trial was pushed back because this trial was taking so long. Like,
mm,
if there is a human being who's got an argument to make for speedy trial being screwed over on a Sixth Amendment question, it's YFN Lucci. His trial isn't gonna won't start until next week, 2 years, and it might get pushed back again because they don't want the YFN defendants and the YSL defendants in the courthouse at the same time if they can avoid it because they're afraid of violence. Um, I mean, honestly, you've just made an argument for a change of venue under those circumstances. Fine, try it in DeKalb, but no. Like when I say this, the courts are a little screwed up right now. This is what I'm talking about. Part of the reason why we've got people dying in jail is because the courts cannot efficiently manage cases.
mm, mm.
That's part of the reason I've been looking and sticking with this YSL case as long as I have. There are things you can see about how everything else is working that are reflected in what's going on in this trial, like around the court system, around how prosecutions work, around how society works, around the poverty of Cleveland Avenue,
Mm,
around the connection between the music industry and violence, frankly. Um, it is a revealing case.
mm,
Um, and it's part of the reason why you've actually got a phalanx of like there are really good reporters who are covering this thing. Like, but those are the guys who are in the courthouse in the room. Like the AJC's guy is super solid. Channel 11's reporter in there is like the best reporter who isn't named George Chidi
mm.
covering this stuff. Um, and others. Really diligent. Some of the finest journalism that you're seeing is going to come out of that case.
Mm, mm. And when do you think that this case is going to, when do you expect the case to completely wrap up?
Maybe May,
May? Okay.
May, unless something crazy happens, which I can't rule out.
Mm,
May.
okay. And my our very last question is how do you handle criticism or pushback, especially when covering any topic or any controversial topics? Because of course you post let's say things on social media or people can comment on it. How do you handle if any type of potential criticism or criticism that's happened in the past?
You know, anthrax in the mail, maybe a drive by. No, no. All right. So I'm like, look, uh, depends on the criticism. I suffer fools not gladly. Uh, Twitter, like, I get surprised. Like, my Twitter engagement has been diminishing over time, and I'm basically abandoning Twitter at this point. Uh, like, I need therapy. like, because sometimes people will go on and I'll go back and forth with them, like people who are not arguing in good faith. Like, the first thing I check is, are you using a real handle in social media? Can I tie what you're saying to an actual human being? Because if I can, I mean, in general, I actually go lighter on those folks because I'm not interested in, I'm not like, somebody who's going to go after me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or something like that, by and large, is a regular person. Like, and I am coming to terms with the fact that I might actually be a powerful figure to to other people like that. So I don't want to be, you kick up, you kiss down. Um, that doesn't mean I'm going to tolerate an asshole. Um, and so your mama jokes, that tends to be a good one. I tell you, I'm bad. It's terrible. I am revealing bad character in this regard, but there it is. Like, I don't, yeah, I will give as good as I get. Like, there's a writer, uh Simon, uh not Bill Simon, not Paul Simon. Uh the fellow who was the author who wrote The Wire, the HBO series The
Mm,
Wire.
okay.
Um like, he plays the dozens on Twitter. He will rend you into pieces. And from time to time, I will be motivated to do that. I use words for a living. If I can't give it as good as I'm getting it, then what's the point? But I'm trying to be a better man. Like, it's like when I'm talking about like these character defects that will cause somebody to question your credibility, this is perhaps the one that I need to work on the most. Like, I I want people to be nice. And when they're not nice, I'm not nice. I need to be nice regardless. Like, conversations like this one between you and I help.
Mm-hmm.
I have to remember that, like, I am surrounded by people who are nice and good and do good things and are worthy of respect, as you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. George, I want to thank you for having the time to talk to me today, and we'll definitely stay in touch for sure. And hopefully, you have a happy New Year and rest of the holiday season.
I will, and I'm grateful for you, and I hope everybody listens.
Yes, definitely. And uh, any departing words, George?
Only questions, like, is it's because who I am is I want to ask you everything, you know. Like, so here's something that's been floating around, like
Okay.
there that uh younger students
Hmm.
have gone feral over the last couple of years. Are you seeing it?
It was I am seeing it for sure. It's the pandemic definitely accelerated the process, and a lot of it deals with the way like that our economy and is structured. It's a lot of kids. School is like the only place of structure for their lives, and so it's outside of that. I mean, I'm aware or vaguely aware of what situations they might be at home, but I don't know 100% of how all my students are living day to day, but or outside of my classroom, of course. But um, yeah, the concept, the feral child or his feral student, that's
And I'm starting to make light of it with that term.
yeah,
I mean, there are a lot of kids who've got emotional issues going
yeah,
on,
oh, yeah,
but I mean, like, the way it's described is there are discipline issues that we're not seeing, that are unusual relative to years past.
yes, yeah. No, this in general, discipline has gotten yeah. There's definitely discipline issues in schools, not just where I work at, but all throughout. And there's just yeah, kids that I feel like, yeah, COVID just didn't help the situation. And then there's also, with many kids, there seems like their attention span is just not where it needs to be. Social media, TikTok doesn't really help with that. A lot of uh, I guess there's been fights at the school where I work at, and I feel like a lot of it deals with whatever's said on social media, or if there's any type of neighborhood beef, it seems like that's kind of lingers over. And there's just this general, I don't know, feeling of a lack of accountability in some certain regards. But uh, education's a huge bureaucracy, so it's there's a lot of things that steps uh, when it comes to discipline, and yeah, there's a lot of underlying issues for sure.
One other thing, like, and it's one of these things that I need to get to this. It's on the list. Eventually, I will report through this. So there was a change in, I think it was state law last year that is now requiring teachers to report signs of gang activity when they see it.
Mm,
Has this hit at all? I don't mean whether or not you're seeing gang activity.
yeah.
I'm saying like this, like what is the what does that reporting mechanism actually look like in practice?
Oh, I'm to be honest, I'm not familiar. I guess I should have been should be familiar with this law, but I've personally not heard of about this. Yeah, a lot of just, I mean, of course, in general, if you see some, we always have this rule of like, or that, not just for the, faculty, but also we tell the students like, hey, if you see something suspicious, then please, report it. And, uh, when it comes to specifically gang activity, I mean, it's, I mean, and that we go over in our student code of conduct at the beginning of the school year about what are gang activity. That's kind of like, I don't know, the presentation we get, it's very outdated, but it's as far as that, it's like not really. I don't think I've gotten like the, I don't know, the training on it per se that would be, I don't know how to describe it, updated.
No, no, that's exactly what I wanted to know
Yeah.
is whether or not this had actually this thing that I'd heard about had actually begun to percolate down. I
No.
think it's kind of ridiculous,
Yeah.
but I don't really know what people are seeing and where it came from and what's
Mhm.
happening. So
Yeah.
I ask somebody
Oh yeah.
who's
Yeah.
yeah.
The only the law that I think you might be aware of, and I think a lot of teachers in general, or people in general might be aware of, is in Georgia educational politics, is how that the divisive concepts law.
Ah,
Yeah, that, I mean, luckily, I mean, I've, or I mean, of course, you probably heard about the one Cobb County elementary school teacher that got
yep.
fired, which is unfortunate in that circumstance. Fortunately, in our school district is relatively, liberal in in that regard. It's not like I've, taught anything that's like I don't even, the vagueness of the law is just so weird to me. That it's just like anything can, from anyone can see any issue as a divisive or controversial topic if someone makes it. But in my current issues class, we talk about lots of different issues like minimum wage or what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. I touched a little bit about what's going on in Israel and Palestine, and it's, I don't know, it's you just that's the, I don't know how to describe it. It's like you go and just and that's the kind of ties in with like finding sources that are credible, like, and then explain like, hey, this is what's going on, or what happened in Ukraine, or happened in Israel, what happened in Atlanta, today, and I don't know. I feel like as long as you're, I don't know, teaching, sticking with the curriculum and not, I guess, quote unquote, going off the rails and conspiratorial. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. But
No, I think you're doing a good job.
yeah.
All right. Like that's what was on my mind. I am here for you and your students any way you want.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm sure I'll reach out to you in the very near future for more interviews. So Thank you very much, and
Happy to
hopefully
help.
thank you, and hopefully have a happy new year.
I will. You too.
Cool. Thank you. Have a good one, George.
You too. Bye bye.